portion describes the great celebration that took place when the Jews inaugurated the temple in the desert. The temple was a temple that remained with the Jewish people for hundreds of years until King Solomon built the permanent structure in Jerusalem. On this day, while the Jews had already practiced erecting the tabernacle, the temple, taking it down, finally the day came when they put it up. They had practiced all the services that were taking place, and for today, we're finally doing it for real. And how would they know that God was all happy and was finally willing to forgive them for the sin of the golden calf? Was when a fire from heaven would descend upon the altar, and then they would know that all had been forgiven. And that's exactly what happened. Aaron, the high priest, the highest position in the temple, his 4 sons, who were priests, Kohanim, were just right under him, right there, working together with him, and they all had the major roles to build this house of God and to make sure that it was totally operable and functionable and also to God's liking. And all of a sudden, while this was truly a moment for the greatest joy, especially for Moshe and especially for Aaron and his children, tragedy struck. Because 2 of his 4 sons, Nadav and Avihu, did something they weren't supposed to. Not a discussion for right now. And a fire once again descended from God and consumed their souls, and they died in the temple. Can you imagine what is meant to be your happiest day, and 2 of your 4 children are taken from you? And also what was meant to be the most perfect day for them as well. The Torah tells us 2 words to describe Aaron's response to this. Vayidom Aharon, and Aaron was silent. Can you imagine someone who just lost the 2 most precious things that parents can ever hope for? The worst tragedy that no parent ever imagines they could live through. And yet, Vayidom Aaron, he remained still. Can you imagine the willpower? Not to scream, not to lash out, not to question God. Elie Wiesel tells us a story that there was a scholar, a young scholar, who learned and people respected him. He was considered to be the prodigy of the town. And one night, a couple of the townspeople witness how he leaves his home and starts to scream at the top of his lungs, "I can't do this anymore. What is the meaning of life? I have so many questions that are unanswered. What's happening here? I cannot continue to learn as before unless I have all my doubts and questions answered." They didn't know what to do. He gave up everything that he strived for, everything that he was doing. He almost was completely giving it all up because he had entered doubt and could no longer feel secure in what he was studying and what he was believing in. Finally, they convinced him to go to a Rebbe, to a Hasidic master in the town over. And he went and he began to scream at the Rebbe, "Rebbe, I've spent my whole life in study, and yet I cannot go on without knowing what the meaning of life is." The rabbi approached him, looked him deep in the eyes, and then gave him a slap. He said, "Rebbe, what is that for? Why would you slap me?" And the Rebbe said, "You fool, you have such a good question. Why exchange it for an answer?" And Elie Wiesel says, this is what the Jewish people are all about. We have great questions. And what do these questions do for the Jewish people? They propel us forward. And we won't stop until we can get a bit of a better answer. It may not answer the entire question, but it answers it just a bit more. And if we would have the answers, we would stop struggling. We would stop striving. We would stop learning. We are who we are because we continue to have these questions. And unfortunately, we have them. We've witnessed this just, unfortunately, in the last half a year. On October 7th, when the Jewish people have once more the big question: why us? Why now? Why our family members? Why our children? Why in such an inhumane fashion? We don't have the answers. But these questions will not stop us from continuing our mission, trying to change the world for a better place, until maybe one day we will have the answer. Vayidam Aaron was quiet. His silence was not a sign that he didn't have all these doubts and questions inside. But he was quiet because he was going to continue doing what he did. And with time, maybe he would find some comfort. Maybe he would find even a little bit of an answer. But until Mashiach comes, the Jewish people know that we will always have more questions than we have answers. Keep asking. Don't ever give up. But just because we don't have the answer today doesn't mean that we're not going to stop seeking for the solutions. Have a good Shabbos.